This is culturally appropriate for the first weekend of November, the unofficial kickoff to the holiday season. So we've got a great show planned for you today. I hope you enjoyed our Halloween show that we did last Tuesday. Now that we're sort of coming down from Halloween, we thought a great segment today would be to go over some of the festivals that are happening right before Christmas during the month of November. This is always kind of an off month. We don't know whether people are putting up their Christmas trees or whether they still got their fall stuff up. Some people have already had their Christmas trees up during trick-or-treating on Halloween night. So we're going to just kind of give you a little bit of a sense of the activities available in the Middle Tennessee region. Next, we are going to talk about Martin Scorsese's new movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, with our special guest, Dr. Kristopher Mecholsky, who is a crime fiction scholar. And as always, we have the weekly film rundown on tap as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, as you know, festival season has kicked off into high gear, and things are pretty breakneck all the way up to the holidays. So now's the time where a lot of the bigger Christmas events are first starting. So we wanted to give everybody a little bit of a preview of those as we go through. And I'm sure over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have some of the organizers of some of these festivals on to talk about what's going on. So we're going to start with festivals that are actually starting to occur tomorrow. And for those of you that are in Murfreesboro or are very close to Murfreesboro, the big event there this weekend is the 4th annual Murfreesboro Bacon Festival. And I think we've got some images of some of these lined up. So the Bacon Festival is going to be from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. tomorrow. And obviously, it's a festival about bacon. So there's going to be all kinds of food trucks. There are going to be all kinds of vendors there, typical festival stuff. So just a few of the items, and I'm going to sound like Bubba in Forrest Gump as I'm reading these, I'm sure. But for those of you that really love bacon, which has become kind of a weird fad over the past 10 years or so, I love bacon as well as everybody else. But bacon's sort of become a condiment as well as a meat. And this festival has got a ton of offerings. We have a maple bacon roll with dipping sauce, maple bread pudding, maple glaze bacon cotton candy, chocolate covered bacon, bacon smoked pork sandwich. I don't know exactly how the pork smokes the pork, but I am definitely there for it to try to find out. Maple bacon, bread pudding. Obviously, there are going to be some BLTs. So this should be a free festival, fun for the entire family. I think there's going to be inflatables because there's always inflatables at these things. So I'd recommend checking that one out. But for our vegetarians, or for those of us that claim to be vegetarians, which is certainly not me, we also have at the Nashville Farmers Market tomorrow the Turnip Green Festival. And I've heard rumors, I'm not quite sure, but apparently at the Turnip Green Festival, there's going to be a 400-pound vat of greens cooking. So I think that's definitely worth going down to the farmer's market to see this week. So, we've got that coming up as well. Those of you that have a garden, have plants outside that you probably lost, RIP, this weekend, you may know or you may not know that greens usually do pretty well over the course of the fall. So, those of you that are planting winter gardens, greens are definitely something that you want to grow. I know like my garden beds are decimated right now, but all of my mustard greens and turnip greens, they're doing just fine. And I can actually see them amid all of the weeds that I neglected to pull up toward the end of the summer. So Turnip Green Festival sounds like it's going to be a blast. We also have tomorrow, for those of you that are in downtown Nashville, the Crafty Bastards Fall Arts and Crafts Fair. So this is an event that's sort of a precursor to Christmas. So you can go, you can find local vendors, maybe find some really cool Nashville, locally owned, locally manufactured Christmas gifts, which is always going to be a fun thing. Get something that's distinctly Nashville or distinctly local coming down the pike for you. So this is an event that I don't think is necessarily free, but there's a tasting garden, there's a brunch that's available. This is kind of your hipster alternative for the weekend. But those of you that want to keep the party going after Halloween, and you see some of the really great vendors we have here, all local, that are going to be at the Crafty Bastards Fall Arts and Fair Festival. But those of you that want to keep the buzz going from Halloween and want to be classy about it, tomorrow is also the Wine Down Main Street Festival in Franklin. So this is an annual wine festival. It's to benefit the Boys and Girls Club of America. And It's an event that you got to pay ahead of time for. You've got all kinds of different wines, again, all kinds of local vendors. It's one of the nice things about Nashville, especially in the fall, is you can just kind of walk around and get a sense of your community. So there'll be live music there, obviously, as well. So this looks like it's going to be a pretty fun event for those of you that are in the Franklin area. The next couple of weeks also mark kind of the unofficial, or really the official kickoff for you early birds who want to get started on some of your Christmas activities early. I know that's one of the frustrating things for me because I'm a big decorator. I'm a big celebrator of the holidays. So I bust my ass getting all of this Halloween decoration out. And then I have a quick turnaround for Thanksgiving. And then I feel like sort of with Christmas, you don't have a lot of time, right? You know, you feel like a slacker if your Christmas lights are still up after January. So we have to cram a lot in. And a lot of people are sort of cutting into Thanksgiving, obviously. But as always, and this has been a Nashville tradition for years, we have a country Christmas at Gaylord Opryland. And for those of you that have not been to a country Christmas at Gaylord Opryland, it is kind of a Nashville rite of passage. One of the coolest things about it is the ice show, and you see ice with an exclamation point over to the side. It's a really kind of amazing art exhibit. You go in, you wear these big parkas, and a lot of artisans that are flown in from Harbin, China have made these giant statues completely made out of ice. I mean, this building is like 17 degrees or something like that. And you see pictures right here. And you go and you sort of see scenes recreated either from, you know, Christmas villages or movies like Elf, movies like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman. I've been going to this since around 2005, and it's been one of my favorite things about the holidays, just to go and to be able to see all of the cool things that are happening. The cool thing about the ice show this year is it actually is the Polar Express, which I don't think, and don't quote me on this, but I don't think that the ice show producers have actually done this before. So this might be a completely new exhibit. There's always an amazing, like, transparent nativity at this event as well. And they're, you know, playing Christmas carols. So I would highly recommend going. It's a little on the expensive side, but it's really an unforgettable event. You can stay in there as long as you want. But the other cool thing is that Opryland itself is just sort of decorated for Christmas, and there's all kinds of other events. They have tubing and snowball fights and some water events. And then there's also a show that is actually going to be at the Opry. And, you know, those of you that have been around Nashville long enough know that the Opry kind of moves to the Ryman during the Christmas season for this reason. But Daryl Worley, the country singer made famous for his Iraq War ballad, Have You Forgotten, is going to be performing a nightly Christmas show as well. So this should be a really fun event. I will say, for those of you that are on a budget, if you look around online, there are usually a lot of coupons for this event. I mean, I think the ice show is, you know, pretty, not like concert ticket Taylor Swift Eras bad, obviously, but it is something that's pretty hefty there, as you see on the screen. But I guarantee you that it's worth it. This is an event that I try not to miss every single year. I mean, it's on my calendar. I'll also say, you know, going early or going really, really late, around January 1st is whenever they close. But after the holidays, it usually does kind of die down a little bit, or on weekdays. So definitely check that out if you haven't. It's kind of a magical way to kick off the holidays for sure. We also have next weekend, Home for the Holidays, for those suburbanites that live in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, which is really close to my house. So Home for the Holidays is basically a giant Christmas market that's taking place in downtown Mount Juliet. And there's going to be all kinds of, obviously, vendors, food trucks, and Santa. I love going to these festivals, but I kind of wish that there was some other component sometimes to them. I mean, I love my food trucks. I love being able to get my vendors, but, you know, at the same time, there's only so many candles and local jams you can buy, right? But it's still nice to get out. Another event that's taking place, for those of you that want to take a little bit of a trek, is the Cookeville Handmade Christmas Marketplace, which is in Cookeville, Tennessee. I sort of feel like Cookeville, see, I said it, Cookeville. Got my southernness coming out today, I guess. But I feel like Cookeville is one of the most underrated towns in the Middle Tennessee area. Those of you that don't know much about Cookeville, it's about an hour and a half toward Knoxville on I-40. And it's a really cool town because it's got a lot of history. Tennessee Tech is there. But in addition to that, it's also the site of one of the biggest moonshine wars in the history of America. Whenever a lot of moonshiners rebelled against some of the revenuers from the IRS. And because of that, it's got a lot of really great history. It's also kind of in the middle of East Tennessee and Middle Tennessee. So you sort of get the best cultural world. There's some great restaurants in Cookeville. There's some really cool shops, some really good bookstores. If you haven't even just made a day trip out there, I would highly recommend it because it's totally worth it. But one of the cool things about Cookeville, maybe as opposed to some of the other kind of more generic festivals, is they really do privilege the sense of community. So they have a lot of incubating space and workspace for local artisans. So some of the best local bakeries, some of the best local craftspeople that I've seen in the entire state are based in Cookeville. So I feel like this is an event that would really be worth making the trek out for and just kind of spending the day out in Cookeville for those of you that don't really have a chance to get out of the city limits or just kind of overwhelmed with the stuff that Nashville offers. So this one comes highly recommended from me. The next weekend brings the Made South Holiday Market to Franklin. And Franklin is probably the holiday capital of Tennessee. Some of you may have been to their annual Dickens Fest, which is always kind of the second weekend in December, but they have a lot of lead up. They had the Pumpkin Festival, I think, last weekend or the weekend before. So this is a really nice place, again, to be able to sort of kick off the holidays fairly early, get a head start on Christmas shopping. That might be one I will be checking out as well. We also have the Middle Tennessee Songwriters Festival, and that's one of the few of these festivals that is not actually holiday themed. This is a chance for songwriters in the Middle Tennessee area to network, to share some of their songs. It provides a space maybe for people who are sort of like not already caught up in the entire songwriting and music apparatus of Music City. So it's an event to kind of get to know some upcoming artists, to experience some music you might not have heard before. And that is actually taking place in Murfreesboro. So you're sort of going to get out of the limelight of corporate Nashville if you go to this event. So it promises to be pretty cool as well. One of my other favorite events in the Nashville area is getting its kickoff on November 17th as well. And that is Zillumination, the Chinese Festival of Lights. The Nashville Zoo kind of seems almost like this forgotten aspect of Nashville. It's a really great cultural center. The zoo does a great job with programming. In addition to just going in and seeing the animals, they have all kinds of programs during the year. And the Zillumination is one of the best. So this is kind of a mix of holiday lights and also the Chinese New Year. So it runs from November 17th to January 7th. And I think we got some pictures here of the Zillumination kind of in the graphic, but they do a remarkable job of just decorating the entire zoo for the holidays and also to kind of get us over into Chinese New Year. So this is also one of those events that you'll be able to go to, but it will be kind of sticking around as well into January. Like I always hate during the holidays whenever, Christmas happens and people start putting up their trees and it just sort of feels like everything is sort of over at that point. So that's unfortunate. And I always like to save a couple of these things toward the end of the holidays to go to so I can keep the celebration going. And this one especially, I think is, if you've got to go to 3 events in Nashville during the holidays, this is one of those 3 events. This one, I would say ICE at Gaylord Opryland, and then one that I am getting ready to talk about here in a bit. So, just looking at these pictures, seeing how much of a effort the zoo puts in and how much effort the zoo puts in also whenever they are doing the regular programming, taking care of the animals. We're very fortunate in Nashville to have this high quality of a zoo that really does sort of provide programming all year round. A lot of zoos just kind of like buckle down through the cold weather and get through, but the Nashville Zoo really leans into it, which is really, really amazing. We also have coming up in Franklin the same weekend on November 17th through November 19th, Franklin's Festival of Lights. And pretty self-explanatory, but again, Franklin, Christmas capital of Tennessee. This is a ticketed event, but it also is a light show. And they've got a lot of new offerings this year. It's going to be at the Williamson County Ag Expo Center. So this is another one of those drive around light exhibits, which is really, really, really cool. My advice for something like this would be, if you're going to Franklin, maybe get this event the same weekend as the Dickens Festival, which is also something that's really great to do. But that's going to be open up until New Year's Eve, and you'll have a chance to go through and see all of these wonderful lights in the Franklin area. Another one of my favorites, and one that I don't miss any year, is the holiday lights at Cheekwood Estate and Gardens. And there are a couple reasons why I really love going to this event. One is that you get to walk around and see Cheekwood and all of this wonderful foliage decorated for Christmas. They do a wonderful job. It's not just kind of like half done, cash grab kind of thing. It's also very, very well attended. But in addition to just going and walking through the lights, they really strive to create a nice sense of ambiance. The mansion, the Cheekwood Mansion, is fully decked out. And typically what they do at this event is they have a theme. So a couple years ago, it was like nutcrackers. A few years before that, before COVID, it was toys that were a century old. And you sort of get to go into the mansion and see what an early 19th century Christmas would look like. And that's really kind of an awesome thing to experience, is to see this, older house that is suddenly now turned into this kind of Christmas utopia. You see the decorations here. They really spend a lot of attention to detail as they're recreating this. But the other cool thing is that typically whatever art exhibit is going on at the time is still going. So last year I kind of had the weird cognitive dissonant experience of seeing this beautifully decorated mansion and all these wonderful Christmas lights. But Charles Addams, the Addams Family creator, they had a massive exhibit of all of his artwork on display in the middle of the Christmas hall. So I was able to, and all the other guests were able to, see these really great New Yorker cartoons. So, Cheekwood is beautiful, but Cheekwood is also a really amazing art venue. They've had over the years everything from like Andy Warhol's been there. They've had exhibits of his work. They had the Charles Addams. They've had a lot of installation work. So, Cheekwood, again, is one of the great and really incredible assets that the Nashville community has. The other great thing about Cheekwood is like you could really spend an afternoon there. So, yeah, it's a little expensive, but, I've been there before and I've spent like 3 hours just kind of walking around, looking at the various houses. And the other really nice thing that Cheekwood offers, as opposed to just kind of showing up and like farming you in like cattle, is they have some really nice deals. So for like $100, you can get like what's called the Merry and Bright package. And with the Merry and Bright package, you get some really fancy s'mores. You get a free drink, some like hot chocolate with a little bit of something extra with it. You get parking, and you also don't have to actually pick a night to go. So a lot of this event is pre-ticketed just to make sure that it's not overcrowded. But if you have the Merry and Bright package, you can just kind of show up whenever you feel like it on a given day. So my wife and I actually went like really late last year, like in early January, like January 8th. And it was great because everything was still up and it wasn't nearly as crowded because kind of the rush was over. It was kind of over their blackout dates, if you will. And we just had kind of the chance to explore Cheekwood, spend as much time in the art gallery as we wanted to. And, we got these Merry and Bright tickets like pretty early in the season and realized like this was maybe a really good time to go. So I know I'm saying that on the show today, and then now everybody's going to show up at the end of January, which, might not be the best option, but yeah, I would definitely recommend Cheekwood. So like my picks for the holidays, again, would be Cheekwood is an absolute must. That's something worth traveling to Nashville for. Ice at Gaylord Opryland, also really, really impressive. And then the offerings that the zoo brings up as well. So one of the great things about living in Middle Tennessee at this point in the year is that it's a nonstop celebration, from the haunted houses that have come up and all of the wonderful pumpkin patches all the way through January. And then things will pick up again in the spring. So Again, we're going to be profiling a few of these festivals on future episodes of Culturally Appropriate, so be sure to tune in and we'll make those announcements early on. Now, we are going to shift to a little bit more morbid topic. We have Cheekwood Botanical Gardens. We're going to shift over to Killers of the Flower Moon with our floral theme. Not the same kind of feel-good holiday market vibe that we've just been talking about. So I would like to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Kristopher Mecholsky. You might remember Dr. Mecholsky from the discussion we had back in July over the Tyler Childers and Jason Aldean videos and their relationship to Burt Reynolds' South. So Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty well. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, everything sounds great.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm well.
But before we kind of like dig into this Scorsese movie, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the book project that just came out that you were a part of with some of your crime fiction studies. And I think we have a link to that as well. So
yeah, sure. I'm really excited about it. There is a book edited by a British scholar named Nathan Ashman. It's through Routledge. It's the Routledge Handbook of Crime Fiction and Ecology. And I have an essay in there that I'm pretty proud of that I've been working on about the crime writer John D. McDonald. He's a Florida crime writer, Florida-based crime writer who honestly had his hands in a lot of genre, including science fiction. But he mainly cut his teeth writing a lot of crime fiction. His main series character is Travis McGee, but he's also probably better known for having written the book that, well, actually, now that I think about it, it's related to Martin Scorsese. He wrote the book that Cape Fear was based on. It's called The Executioners. So I only just made that connection, but it is related to Martin Scorsese in that regard. But the essay is on John D. McDonald's book, A Flash of Green, which I'm calling the first eco-crime fiction that I'm aware of. It's kind of a burgeoning genre that is still in some flux, but I'm pretty proud of it.
Yeah. So I'm just asking this because my audience really cares about the conference that we're going to be attending next week. But is this what you're presenting on next week at the conference, or are you doing something different?
No, something totally different.
Okay. What are you doing next week? Let's just promote that too, even though
actually
you want to hang out in Buckhead with Chris and I at the
actually the thing that I'm working on for the conference next week would probably literally be of more interest to people here, which is that I'm looking at the kind of Sherlock fandom. I'm looking at Sherlock fandom and connections that neurodivergent fans have, specifically with Sherlock Holmes, and how that often dictates arguments over which Sherlock Holmes is better. And really, in recent years, it mainly comes down to Johnny Lee Miller versus Benedict Cumberbatch, with some Robert Downey Jr. addiction fans in there, but it's mainly the neurodivergence depicted by Johnny Lee Miller versus Benedict Cumberbatch as to which one is the quote better.
And I guess Robert Downey Jr. just kind of throws the narcissism in as opposed to the neurodivergence.
Yeah, exactly. I have a soft spot in my heart and brain for the Robert Downey Jr. Adaptations, partially because I think it does a good job of playing up the action aspect of Sherlock Holmes, which is there in the stories. It's not as overt as it's done in the Robert Downey Jr. movies, but it's there. It's in the lore. It's in the canon. So I like that they lean into that a little bit. And he's a great avatar of narcissistic addiction that Sherlock Holmes is a representative of, even if it's not maybe the fairest assessment of who I think Holmes is ultimately. But I like that version of him. So.
Yeah, and I know kind of your claim to fame is Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I know you've given a lot of public talks. Talks to libraries, talks to groups of students. And then James M. Cain, the amazing author of Mildred Pierce and a lot of movies that came out of the studio era of Hollywood. But you've also published, if I'm not mistaken, a little bit on Scorsese, right? I know you did an essay on Shutter Island a few years ago.
That's exactly right. I'm relatively knowledgeable about Martin Scorsese. I won't claim any great expertise or anything, but yes, and one of the reasons the Shutter Island essay that I wrote has to do with his use of genre, which I think is completely relevant to Killers of the Flower Moon, and it's also why I think he's often misunderstood. Is that most film goers are not very interested in his playing around with genre, but I think it's what he does best, and I think it's also usually his critical. That's the way his creative forces are making a critical intervention into the stories and topics that he's interested in, including this one.
Yeah, and I've got to be honest about this. And I wrote my sort of main article for the Pamphleteer this week on Killers of the Flower Moon. I wanted to write it sooner, but I don't feel like I was able to really parse out my thoughts about the movie. Typically I'll go see something and then just kind of file my copy in the next couple days, depending on our schedule. But like, I couldn't figure this out. Like I was, obviously took half the day off, to watch it. I went down to the theater in Franklin and the Dolby Theater, which was kind of an amazing experience because, as I was telling you earlier this week, when the oil gushes out of the ground, the whole theater vibrates. And whenever people are being shot or there's any kind of violence happening, like you really feel it just because of the way that Scorsese directs the staging.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of like just watching a movie, I went at 8:30 at night. I got home at like 3 a.m. It was just like, it was a big experience. It was the best viewing experience that I've had at the movies that I can remember. Maybe since Tarantino's The Hateful Eight roadshow that he did way back in the day.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that's including 70mm Oppenheimer. My problem though is like, I liked Oppenheimer more as a film, and I just like, I could not parse out why, because, everything about this movie is, Scorsese knows exactly what he's doing. It's probably one of his best directed movies. And there's been online, like there's the clip from Shutter Island that's kind of a flashback to the war has kind of been making the rounds on social media.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I don't really know why that's the case. I guess people are sort of revisiting Scorsese, but I mean, this was a fully realized movie. I loved watching it. I didn't get bored for a second of the 3.5-hour runtime, but something left me a little cold, and it's taken me like a long time to parse that out. I don't know that this is even going to make my best of list at the end of the year, even though I really, really want it to. I know that, based on our conversation, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today, I know that your thoughts about this film are not uncritical either. So do you want to just sort of share your thoughts about watching this film?
Yeah. And I share your hesitation about talking about it yet, because I liked it. I walked out liking it. The person I watched it with, we both admired it right off the bat. And to some degree, I feel like, I could use another watch. And I because it's such a massive event, I couldn't fit that in this week. I even, I considered it, knowing that I was going to be on today. I was like, with everything else, I can't chunk out what amounts to 4 hours, with driving, with previews. It's probably more than that, in fact. And I just couldn't carve that out. I will say that, so part of my, I don't have a completely uncritical response to it. And part of my interest and enjoyment of it is definitely my awareness of his willingness to work with genre, to manipulate genre, to shift genre. And in this movie, he has a lot of situations where he's trying to make it clear he could go off in directions of the Western, off in directions of bootlegging, off in directions of criminal investigation. And he really resists that repeatedly. He repeatedly resists those temptations to the degree that, unlike The Departed, unlike Goodfellas, unlike Wolf of Wall Street, we don't have a charismatic. We don't have a charismatic guy in the middle of it all that we're following, for better or worse. And you touched on this in your review a little bit, and I think you saw this as something I think he was pulling back on, and I think I disagree with that. I think he wanted his central character to be Ernest Burkhart's kind of dumb white guy who is accidentally pulled into complicity with this what amounts to a kind of white supremacist takeover of the Osage wealth. And but it was never that nefarious. It was never that well considered. It was never that. It's more of that he suddenly, like, he actually does love his wife. He he isn't sure what he's doing. He kind of gets pulled into this without ever meaning to, and the degree to which he knows he's getting pulled into it, he is frequently repressing, seriously repressing, even up to the last moment where he's talking with Molly, and she's. I hope it's understood that there are spoilers.
Yeah,
this.
spoiler alert. We can really talk about this movie for 30 minutes without.
Yeah, I'm really sorry.
No.
But and I mean, in fairness, the book's been out for a long time, and if you haven't, and the book, it recounts this, but even to the last minute, she just wants him to confess himself, because I think she loves him. He loves her. She loves him. It was never for this movie anyway. It's never about this nefarious plot that you get pulled into. It's about the utter stupidity of allowing yourself to get pulled along into it against your family and against your own better judgment and against your own better maybe interests in nature. But he's just he's a dumb guy. He's a dumb guy who can't do any better, and he keeps rationalizing to himself that what he's doing is, yeah, I'm a good guy. I love that line where he's like, "Do you consider yourself a good man?" He's like, "Yeah, I mean, I think he's not lying. He really does consider himself a pretty good guy. Like, he's not the best, but he's better than most," is how he sees it. And ultimately, what I think the film is trying to have the viewers understand is that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And just the same way that I think Robert De Niro means it every time he says she's with God now, like he means it every single time. He's that mob boss, like Paul Newman's character in Road to Perdition, who will absolutely buy the funeral for the very person who he puts the hit out on. And it's not ironic, it's not double-faced. They don't see it that way. And part of the tragedy of this is that Leonardo DiCaprio's character Ernest, who's I don't think is necessarily a historical Ernest, but the character Ernest realizes way too late how easily he got himself kind of pulled into this scheme. I talked at length. I should stop.
No, well, I mean, you brought up a couple of things that I wanted to parse out a little bit. One of them is like my favorite scene in the movie, and I do not want to spoil this particular thing. I mean, obviously it's called Killers of the Flower Moon. Lots of people die. There's this really amazing scene toward the end whenever, there are certain characters in jail, kind of answering for their crimes. And De Niro and DiCaprio have this like kind of moment of sorrow together, even though, there's betrayal going on and professionally, like this entire operation is going to come crashing down. And I think that scene is one of the best scenes Martin Scorsese has ever directed. So, I don't want to give the impression that like, the reviews have been on both sides of this really frustrating for me, maybe more than any other movie, just because we talked about the Armand White review, and I like Armand White at certain times. I always find that when I really hate a movie, everybody else likes, he gives a really good reason. But I also feel like if there's a director that people hold in high esteem, he does everything he can to tear them down. I mean, his review of Priscilla today, just like completely tenured. Just because it was Sofia Coppola. And he's done the same thing with Noah Baumbach because he has a feud with his mom. And to the point that, like, I know, like, whenever Lady Bird came out, he really liked Lady Bird, and then he realized that Greta Gerwig was with Noah Baumbach, and then he, like, retconned his positive rave review of it. So, I mean, there's a lot of that going on, especially, I think, on the right's criticism, where this is a woke movie about evil white people, and I think that it's just a stupid reading of the movie.
It's too way too flat,
hopefully ignorant or stupid.
Yeah.
In the very same way that like the Barbie reviews were, completely and utterly performative, just to try to get a rise.
Agree. Yeah, and he's easy to do this with because Scorsese, not Armand White, but because his fans are so easy to hate. I mean. And I'm a Scorsese fan. I really try not to be that Scorsese film bro, but he's very easy to hate because you find those people who are like, "Oh, I love Wolf of Wall Street. What a cool character." You're like, "Oh, I think you're misreading this," and so he's very easy to hate on for sure.
Yeah, and that one of the aspects I did want to talk about is my review of the movie, and the thing that I literally just like, I thought about this every day to the point of like, I don't want to say obsession, and I'm also not a Scorsese bro, but I mean, his journey through American movies, that's a film history class in and of itself. I really appreciate Scorsese's work, but that what I appreciate the most about him is like that intentional rise that he gets out of people whenever he's dealing with moral weight. And you mentioned Ernest confessing, which really is, I mean, I had Ryan Whitaker on the show a couple weeks ago, right, who made the movie Surprised by Oxford, which is another movie that I really, really, one of my favorites of the year. And we were talking about like the religious elements of Catholic Scorsese. But that I can't think of a Scorsese movie that does not deal with the themes of confession. Do you have anything you want to say about that? Because I know you've written about it. So
yeah, no, that's really great. Well, because that's why I see. Oh gosh, now that I think about it, I didn't put this together until now, but I see a very strong parallel between this movie and Shutter Island, specifically in Leonardo DiCaprio's character's inability to confess at the end, which. If there's anything, all right, I'll answer your first part. Yes, I think you're exactly right. There's probably not one Scorsese movie that doesn't center around these aspects of guilt and confession, but maybe more of the lack of it. I think he's just as concerned with people unable to do that, even if they would ultimately solve their worst sins. It's their inability to bring themselves to do that, either because they can't face it, or because it's too dark of a sin for them. Yeah, it's too dark of a sin maybe for them to face. So I see a similarity at the end of Shutter Island, which again, I don't want to spoil that if anyone's never seen it. But it to me, that the ending of this was just as heartbreaking, where you just want him to do the right thing, at least right here. It's not gonna make everything better. I think the saddest thing about that scene is that you do think that maybe it would make things better for Molly, if he would just give the full and final confession, and he can't bring himself to do it. I know that you mentioned in your review that you were a little the antagonistic aspect of Scorsese. I think he is sometimes antagonistic, for sure. But I think that I don't know. I don't know that he really wants to do that. I get the sense with Goodfellas and with The Wolf of Wall Street that he's more, and Robert De Niro's character in Mean Streets, I think he's more just really, really enamored and kind of fascinated by these very charismatic bad people who are just way too self-involved and fun to realize the problems that they're causing until it's too late, and then sometimes not being able to go back, and sometimes not being able to face that. And I don't think that that's at all what he was trying to do with this movie. I think in some ways this movie was meant to implicate maybe even the people who like those movies for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that's something that Scorsese has done, especially over the last few years. I mean, some of the films, the gangster films especially, I mean, what I kept thinking about was that scene in The Departed where Jack Nicholson's got the cocaine and he's like with the prostitutes and his partner at the time, and just kind of throws it and he just looks like Satan.
Yeah.
And, Jack Nicholson is such a magnetic performer as well that, like, I mean, the scene is cool. Yeah. For lack of a better word, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's awesome. I mean, like, and we know this guy is like completely devoid of any basic sense of morality. But it's still incredibly engaging. And
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Scorsese, I feel like there is that level of moral analysis in the audience that, like, you're watching The Wolf of Wall Street. You know that Scorsese doesn't identify with this character. He's like obsessed with the magnetism.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's this level of audience implication in a very similar way to something like Eli Roth's Hostel, where you're watching these people being tortured and you're watching it for entertainment. But if you're thinking outside of what the situation is, that's where the art comes from in a lot of ways, but sort of the brilliance of Scorsese for me is like, he's got that tack that his movies are operating on, but he also has this examination of religion and immigration. I mean, because Catholicism itself, and, growing up in that Catholic household, which is something you see a lot of, especially in those early shorts. Catholicism is an immigrant religion in America in so many ways. And that's the portrait that he takes, even over somebody like Coppola. You know, I mean, Coppola's famous for his cross-cutting massacre scene during the christening in The Godfather, but you know, this is Scorsese's line throughout. I mean, even to the point that we have Catholics in Killers of the Flower Moon, which may have been one of the reasons that, you know, drew him to that. I mean, and I'm definitely willing to admit that maybe my like reticence with the movie might just be like Scorsese's doing something different. But
yeah, I think he is. I think he's doing, and I don't know. It's not as exciting. Which I think was also kind of the point of the movie. He takes pains to remove the investigative aspect of the genuine story out of this, to the point that you are left with very little information about the FBI's investigation into this, and which is interesting in and of itself as the book dives into. The book does an excellent job just with the length that it has of being able to juggle the Osage Nation's story as well as the FBI's story without it feeling like it's privileging one over the other. It's instead kind of the weird intersection of these groups at this point in history. And instead, Scorsese took, I think, great pains to really remove the FBI story. And it's not because the movie's not about whiteness. It's just not about that kind of whiteness. We've had that before, and I think he really wanted to honestly only indicate it to the degree that it wraps things up at the end and gives us a historically accurate solution. But I think he's far more interested in the recklessness of white greed, not even white greed, but just like white complicity. Because almost every character who does a bad thing in here doesn't think of it that way. They're just kind of trying to help somebody out of a spot, or they're trying to help the Osage, and they really believe it. And so I think, if anything, his target here is like Martin Luther King, like Malcolm X. The target here is white moderates who are kind of willing to are accidentally willingly helping oppress a group. And they don't. And by the time they start to realize that they did it, they still can't bring themselves to admit that they did wrong. That's the sad part of this. It would be so much easier if it was a magnetic, horrible white guy that you were following, but it's not, which is why I'm with you. I don't understand some of the critiques of this movie as saying that it's that it revels in torturing the natives. It's the native tribes. I don't think it's interested in reveling that at all. The ending of the whole movie, which again I won't spoil, but the ending of that really plays up the fact that this could have been done in a much more exploitative way, and it's not. It's much more though about how these two groups come together, and how even without, and maybe especially without trying, the white characters have managed to convince themselves that they're doing the right thing by kind of systematically oppressing this group, even when they think they're literally being their best friends.
And we have the staging as well, which I think is very different. The violence in this movie is either very perfunctory, or it's I don't want to say it's played in a comedic way, but you know, the sheer idiocy of how some of it plays out is like funny and darkly funny. Yeah. Whereas if you look at The Departed and you have that massive shootout with Frank Costello, or you look at Goodfellas and you think about the Michael Imperioli scene where Joe Pesci just shoots him for the hell of it.
Yeah.
We don't have violence in that regard here. You know, even though this is a movie that's still very compelling. I think what frustrates me about sort of the left is,
sorry, just really quickly, it's like waiting. It's like absurdist humor. It's not darkly funny. It's more like funny, like Waiting for Godot's funny, where you're laughing, but you're laughing because it's really sad,
right?
Not because it's shocking. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
And I mean, that what does sort of bother me about sort of the left critique, and there's been, which I think really plays into the themes of the movie. There's been this sort of like trend of legacy publications that are like largely run by like white moderates or white liberals who are like finding the native informant to like write the essay about how they were bothered by the movie. Because I mean, I linked to a few of those in the article, and you know, there seems to be sort of this false dichotomy that like either Scorsese gets to make a movie about natives or Native Americans do, and they can't exist in the same film ecosystem. And you know, that's simply not true, because Lily Gladstone has been in a couple of movies that were, you know, very native focused and very well reviewed and well regarded over the past couple of years. So there's this sort of like idea of that, like Scorsese is not allowed to make this movie at this point in time, which I do wonder how much that sort of affected some of the approach that he took. The other issue I think that's very complicated with the movie itself, and Scorsese does a really nice job of doing this, is just the federal government's role, because the white savior version of this movie would be dishonest because it's a white savior, but because the federal government at this point was so overreaching. So we have Jesse Plemons as this, like, one of my favorite characters, because he's not in the movie until like probably not even the last full hour of this 3.5 hour movie,
right, which is very different from the book. Different from the book.
Yeah, and he looks kind of like, he looks a little oafish, but he's just like a consummate professional, which is one of the kind of like great secret weapons of Jesse Plemons as an actor. But he is very sincere. He does want to solve this case. He wants to help out Molly, who makes that trek in the middle. But when we sort of think about, and the book goes into this in a lot more detail, like the land itself is not even Osage land. It's Osage land because the federal government kicked them out of their original land.
Right.
So like there's this Ouroboros situation where the federal government is coming in to fix a problem that they caused in the first place.
I know.
And then you have all of the payouts and the sort of bureaucracy of how these oil rights are going toward the Native Americans, which is the sort of horrible amalgamation of Oklahoma state government and the federal government. So, I don't think Scorsese in that sense, like, there's that idea that like, oh, he just like put the FBI agent at the end of the movie, so it wasn't a white savior movie. But thematically, with what he was trying to achieve, like that would have been incredibly disingenuous to sort of have Plemons come in and just sort of take over, right?
Yeah. It's funny you say that now, and I can see a point to that he did, maybe he did pull some punches. I see the irony is I do think that this movie is about white people. I think it's meant to try to rectify historically some wrongs done by being as utterly respectful as it can be of the Osage people and of what they went through without doing injustice to the historical facts that happened, for one. But I do see maybe him pulling back a little bit because I don't know. I keep going back and forth because you're right. He could have highlighted far more I mean, there's a little bit of it at the beginning, kind of indicating that they're moving from one land to another, and they kind of talk about how this is they're not going to move again, and so it's given a little bit of. I think you're supposed to bring a lot of that. The viewer is supposed to bring a lot of that historical knowledge to the table, and maybe he could have played that up more. But honestly, I think that the real target here is the well-meaning white. That the whole trial is done in such a way where you, the viewer, don't have a whole lot of information about it. We are given very little information about the defense, very little information about the prosecution. We have Ernest's viewpoint, and Ernest's viewpoint is, wait, what? Like he feels guilty because he realizes he's guilty. He's starting to finally realize he's guilty. It takes him so long for him to realize his complicity. And so then by the time the things start crashing down, it doesn't crash down like it does in The Godfather, where you get a nice objective cross-cutting and the director's eye is God's eye, is the film viewer's eye, where you're going, oh, look at these people, what have they done? Instead, you're like Ernest and you're suddenly thrust into the courtroom and you're like, what's happening? And you're like, are you ready? Is this man your lawyer? And you, the viewer, are just like Ernest. You're like, I don't know. Is he? Like, no, you have no clue. And you're not meant to. You're supposed to be just as utterly dumbfounded about this. And that is the exact opposite of what he indicates towards the end of the film, is that like he could have given you all of the answers here. He could have told you exactly the investigation. Instead, you're always wondering, is that native guy working with Tom or not? Like, is he an infiltrator? In the book, but in the movie, you are left often you're left just as in the dark as Molly and just as in the dark as Ernest. And I think that's to its credit.
Yeah. And one of the other really nice touches is like there's that other conversation, which, I mean, this movie, really shows why Martin Scorsese is such a great director, just like Oppenheimer showed why Nolan is. That so much of it is like people in rooms talking.
Yeah,
And it's so cinematic. And there is that really great scene where De Niro tells him, like, the feds are going to screw you over.
Right.
And we find out at the end of the movie, like, in the middle of doing the right thing, like, Hale is exactly right. That's what ends up happening in some ways. I did want to, I don't really want to
that's true.
talk about this as much because I don't want to ruin it for people. Two things I really want to ask you. And one is, I still don't know how I feel about this because I sort of had this whiplash when the lawyers came in and we have Brendan Fraser, like, still with his whale weight on and John Lithgow. Like, did that take you out of the movie? Because that moment for me just kind of like, I can't decide if I liked it or not. And there've been some kind of weird.
No, I loved it, but for the reasons I just said. I loved it for the reasons that I just said, which is that it is a whiplash moment. Like, he suddenly is like, because he's just kind of going along and he literally doesn't, he's going along with the things that his uncle is telling him to do, but he really doesn't see it as anything other than, look, who do you want to have this money? These people are dying. And it's just going to go to that idiot over there. We should keep it in the family. We care. And I think he completely convinces himself that what he's doing is the right thing. It's a little uncomfortable. It's not exactly the right thing to do, but it's for the best. And they know better. They know better, and they know what to do. And they're going to take care of this. And is it the best? Is it the nicest thing? No, but it's for the best. We got to stop Bill Smith. We got to, there are dying people anyway. We want to do what we can to make them comfortable now. And you can't let, he keeps trying to, the uncle's trying to control this, but he does it from the perspective that I think he means, which is that he cares about the Osage people more than other people do. I think the movie kind of suggests, so what? So what if he does? Like, it doesn't change the fact that you systematically murdered all of these people. And so I like the moment where it becomes suddenly a huge media trial circus because you're just as uncertain about what the implications are or where all of these people come from or how they know all of this. Like, I like that moment where Brendan Fraser is like, and they spanked you, didn't they? And you see Ernest Burkhart, like you see his face of like, wait, what do you know? And I better just go along with this. There's a subtle blackmailing going on, and he's so in the dark. And Lithgow arguing, and they're yelling at, and the whole group's back there. And Ernest Burkhart is way out of his depth, and he suddenly realizes it. He's like, "Oh my god!" And all he can do is try to save. Well, not all he can do, but all he does do is try desperately to save face. And he immediately does the stupidest thing he can, which is not the stupidest thing, but he goes against what he wants to do. And what he wants to do is confess. What he wants to do is finally do the right thing. And instead he goes along with the thing that will save face, and that's, you're right. Like, I think Scorsese is really interested in that. He wants people, or he's really fascinated by that willingness to destroy yourself, regardless of whether that would actually heal you or not.
So, I mean, I also don't want to ruin the ending of the movie, but I want to talk about the ending. And there is a sort of like, I talked about this with Davis when I saw the movie, like, there's this weird Nashville connection because Scorsese, for some reason, cast like Jason Isbell and Sturgill Simpson and all of these like outlaw country guys, plus Jack White in various roles in the movie.
Yeah.
And, Scorsese himself and Jack White are in like the final scene. I know a lot of people have had problems with that. I thought it was utterly brilliant.
Why?
Why did I think?
Yeah, I have my thoughts. Yeah. So I want to hear yours.
So, we talked a little bit about how this movie relates to the other DiCaprio portrayal of this time period, J. Edgar, which, I mean, is a very uneven movie, but a film I have a lot of a soft spot for. Mm-hmm. And there's so much in Eastwood's movie about J. Edgar infiltrating Hollywood in the same way that, communists were supposed to do with this propaganda, like the Melvin Leroy movie with Jimmy Stewart that Armand White mentions in his review about J. Edgar's FBI. And this is a radio program that basically is funded by the federal government, funded by the Bureau of Investigation, that's telling these thrilling stories. And, what we find out is like the irony of that scene is this thrilling FBI adventure that Scorsese's denied us basically for 3 hours ends up in like, and everybody went to prison for a little bit.
Yeah.
And there wasn't really justice, but this is an awesome radio show, right? I mean, that like just that gut punch of that just really nailed the ending for me. I absolutely loved it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about it as well.
Yeah, well, I think Scorsese is like, I mean, he's such a Catholic masochist. I think he had a field day casting Robert De Niro, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jason Isbell, just about every white liberal you could find who, and he put them all into these roles of these well-meaning whites who just really still kill everything. And it's kind of the irony. I think he's probably to some degree enjoying some of the reviews that are raking him across the coals as doing a disservice to native tribes, because I think he probably wouldn't entirely disagree. I mean, I think he absolutely did everything he could to be as respectful as possible. I think this is the ending is heartbreaking. The very, very last image is heartbreaking, and it's a beautiful moment of having no white people involved. But the irony being that it's being zoomed at, whatever, that a white man is absolutely 100% in charge of it. And I think he knows he can't get away from that. And I think that's why I think he to some degree he's raking himself across the coals. Like, this is a very personal film, ironically, I think. And so I think he wanted to populate it with white liberals in the culture industry, because they're just as complicit ultimately in systematic oppressions of white people, partially because of exactly what he's saying, which is exactly what King says and what Ernest Burkhart says, which is they just think they know better. They're really convinced they do.
Yeah. And it's just dawning on me that like Isbell and then Simpson and all of these figures were also the people that were just jumping into this Tyler Childers Aldine thing we talked about 3 months ago.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, he probably, if Scorsese was aware of that, which who knows, probably not. Because I get the sense he's not that clued in, that keyed in, but he would have loved that.
Yeah,
he would have been like, yeah. I don't think he doesn't have any easy answers for it. I don't think it's. I don't know. I do think I think I've said this to you before, but I do think that I think this will stand the test of time. I think that for every movie that you can look at every movie in the pantheon of the canon, you look at the contemporary reviews of it, and there are absolutely the detractors. There are the celebrators. I think that there is a moment right now that we're going through where, it's like the terror. It's like the reign of terror. And I'm not trying to put too much of a point on it, in the sense that the left it allows itself to get a little carried away. It allows itself to get carried away. And I think that over time that will have an evening effect. What was it? New York Times magazine. I forgot who went after Hassan Minhaj recently. That had some lasting. I think that's going to have some lasting effect on his career, but I don't think it's going to sink it ultimately, because I think it was not well. I think it was well done. I don't think that the hit on Hassan Minhaj was. I don't even care for Hassan Minhaj all that much, but I felt like the hit that they tried to kind of take him down and cancel him, frankly. I don't think it's ultimately going to have worked in the long run. And so I do think that the targets that are unfairly people try to take down, I think they'll all usually ultimately stand the test of time. And it's just are there going to be too many of them right now? Yeah. In the same way that I don't think enough people really liked Shutter Island when it came out. They thought it was just kind of a cheap horror flick. I think it's one of Scorsese's best movies. Yeah. And so, and as you pointed out, maybe people are continuing to kind of rediscover it. So I'm okay if there are some pot shots at Scorsese. He can handle it. He's certainly doing enough to call all of enough anger on his head with his Marvel comments that if that hasn't sunk him yet, I think he'll be good to go.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, when I was doing my movie guide for the year back in January, I was really, really, really annoyed that I think the general plan was to premiere this and Napoleon on Apple TV.
Oh,
And, I know word is going to be out on Napoleon because I just like after House of Gucci, I just don't think I can trust Ridley Scott anymore, especially as good as I love The Last Duel, which was the same year. But
yeah.
I'm just really thankful that we got the chance to see this on the big screen just because, I admittedly still have not seen The Irishman because I just like the whole Netflix thing left me really cold. And
And
I
I don't
just
think
missed it
it's
when it was in theaters. Like, I don't want to watch The Irishman on Netflix, even though I've got the Criterion Blu-ray of it now. But that's
yeah,
like the
yeah.
one Scorsese movie I just kind of skipped because I almost was like, I do not want to watch America's Greatest Living Director premiere on Netflix. It's just not something I'm interested in. I mean, I will get to it eventually, I'm sure, but
Well, if it makes you feel any better, and for any viewers out there who are on the fence about seeing Killers of the Flower Moon because they watched The Irishman and left it with a bad taste in your mouth, it's too long. It was not successful. I think the ending of The Irishman is worth it. For probably the whole movie's worth the ending, the last half an hour to an hour of it. But honestly, the de-aging stuff was such a terrible call. So you just have Robert De Niro trying to act like a young, and it doesn't work because he's older, and so that takes me out of it completely. But the ultimate artistic statement he was trying to make is excellent, but it's too long. I think that one could have been a lot shorter.
yeah.
So
And I mean,
Killers of the Flower Moon is not like that. To any of you who have seen The Irishman but haven't seen Killers, Killers is not like that. I think it was an appropriately long movie.
yeah. And I mean, and
Not too long.
I will also say like, The Flash was interminable. Saw 10,
Exactly.
Saw 10
See?
felt way longer than Killers of the Flower Moon. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt like I was in the theater for an hour and I didn't want it to end, even though my
Yeah.
back was hurting, because
Yeah.
I mean, it is worth it to see this in a theater. It's what's great about the movie is that it does merit discussion. It's a real piece of art. So I would recommend everybody go see it, A, because we want more adult movies in theaters, but B, like it is an experience. It is the experience we do not get anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that everybody should go see this thing. Well, Chris, thank you so much for talking to us today about Killers of the Flower Moon. And again, I think this movie will probably be playing right through the Thanksgiving holidays until all of the big Christmas movies start coming out.
Yeah.
But I'd say, like,
You're
well, you
right.
got some downtime during the holidays, during these last couple of weekends, like go see it.
Empty your bladder beforehand.
Make sure that The Marvels doesn't replace it in theaters next week because Scorsese might be so apoplectic he might never make another movie. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
all right, I'll see you next week, Chris.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jerod.
Bye. All right, so we're going to end with our weekly film rundown. And as much as I was looking forward to Killers of the Flower Moon, I am really looking forward to this weekend. I actually already have my tickets for this evening to go see the two of the films that I've been looking forward to since I heard they were announced. And the first one is Sofia Coppola's Priscilla. I would make the argument Sofia Coppola is a better director than her father. Her career has not had nearly as many missteps. Every one of her movies that I've seen, with the exception of her last one, On the Rocks, has been an instant classic for me. So this is an actual adaptation of Priscilla Presley's autobiography. So Coppola is not trying to do something as political as like, let's look how evil Elvis is. That's not what's going on in this particular movie at all. This is just a different perspective. Coppola is one of my favorite directors. I don't think that she's ever really made a misstep. I think that she is, a very envelope pushing director. Just looking at a movie like Marie Antoinette, which everyone hated when it came out and is now considered this very much like Shutter Island, a new classic. This film just looks remarkable and amazing and gorgeous to me. So this is where I will be at some point this weekend, likely tonight. I think I've already actually got my tickets on the AMC app. So highly recommended. Another film that I would highly recommend is Alexander Payne's The Holdovers. And something really cool that's happening this week at the Belcourt Theater in Nashville is it is one of 5 theaters that are getting an early 35 millimeter print of The Holdovers. And there's also going to be this week a taped video introduction with Alexander Payne, the director. So this movie stars Paul Giamatti as kind of a curmudgeonly old high school boarding school teacher. And he's left at Christmas time because he's lonely and doesn't really have anybody in his life to babysit a troubled student. And the only other person that is at the school with him is the maintenance worker, the custodian who just lost her son in Vietnam. So this might sound very maudlin. This might sound like a very sort of like overtly sentimental movie, but the people that would be saying that have never seen an Alexander Payne movie. There is not a more vicious satirist in the American cinema than Alexander Payne. So I'm very much looking forward to this movie because, yeah, I do think it's going to be heartwarming, but I think it's going to be cutting and hilarious at the same time. So I hope I can make time for this one as well. I do want to see it at that 35 millimeter screening. It will be expanding wide, I'm sure, because it is one of the primary Oscar contenders, but you're not going to be able to recreate that experience at the Belcourt. So if you get a chance, go see it this weekend as well. We have some other films that they're also opening up this week as well that might not be as as popular here. We've got The Marsh King's Daughter. One movie that I'm looking forward to, and I sadly missed this at the Nashville Film Festival just because of the horrific way that it was organized, and this played at Vanderbilt, but the movie Divinity, I don't know what the hell to make of this thing. It's distributed by Utopia. Steven Soderbergh produced it. It's a highly experimental art film that's supposed to be a horror movie. Stephen Dorff and Bella Thorne are in it. I am just going to check it out of sheer curiosity because it just looks insane. So I definitely would recommend checking this out as well. Those are kind of my three major films that I am hoping to get to this week. And definitely just watching this trailer, like I don't even know what to make of it. It looked, I don't want to use the word really cool, but I mean, it just looks like an art house fever dream to me. So I'd love to have some people on the show to talk about this if y'all get the chance to see it. There's also an anime movie opening up this week as well. We have a couple of other things that are just kind of like, yeah. Meg Ryan and David Duchovny are starring in a romantic comedy that's coming up this week called What Happens Later, in which they are stranded at a regional airport. And this is Meg Ryan's directorial debut. So the queen of the contemporary rom-com is putting her stamp on the genre. Reviews have not been great, but you know, it's got snow in it. It's the holiday season. It's not just some crap that's dropped on Netflix. Like, why would you not want to go see this? And then that's basically our last live action movie. Regal Cinemas is doing a special presentation of an anime film that has gotten like 100% called The Tunnel to Summer, The Exit of Goodbyes. Critics have been raving about this movie. It's kind of a nostalgic coming of age tale. It's playing in limited release this week. So I would recommend, if you're an anime fan, checking that out. Really, you know, there's a lot of other openings. This was the weekend Dune was supposed to come out. So there's not been a lot on the schedule. Like, I don't know that Priscilla would have been released as wide had Dune still been on the calendar. But there's also a lot of really good opportunity to see some films you might not otherwise have gotten to see. And I will also say, even though this is not in the rundown, and the full rundown is available as always on the Pamphleteers website, this is a chance also to go see Oppenheimer again on the big screen, because there's been a minor re-release of that movie in some theaters. And also one of the most underrated movies of the year, Gran Turismo, which I saw the trailer, saw on a whim, did not think I would have any chance of really liking, but it really kind of blew me away. And David Harbour's performance in that is one of my favorite of the year. So if you get a chance to go see like the discounted price Gran Turismo or Oppenheimer, that's also an option this week. And that concludes our weekly film rundown and the show. So thanks for joining us. We will be back next week. And whatever you do this weekend, give it some thought. Have a good one.